Welcome to another episode of Rob Wright's Gen X Pop Culture. And on today's show, we're going to talk about the great 1984 movie, the original Red Dawn. This movie is an amazing movie. It's kind of a cult classic, and it's a movie that I really enjoy. I first saw it when I was a kid. It came on cable TV. I didn't see it in the theaters. And the coolest thing is that when I was a kid, we used to play guns all the time outside. And this movie was kind of our basis for playing guns and war games and stuff like that. I remember I had a babysitter who was my neighbor, who was a teenager. His name was Dennis. We called him Dino, and he showed us this movie. And then he also gave us these cap guns that looked like Uzis, and you'd feed the little the straight line caps into them, and then you shoot them, and they looked like real machine guns. And back then, it was. You didn't have any safety orange things on the front of these guns. You just had those, and we played guns with cap guns and various other toy guns, and we pretend baseball bats were grenade launchers and rocket launchers, and part of our inspiration for using that and for all these different battle tactics and things was this movie, and I love it. It's a great movie. I still love it today. However, this movie is rather serious. I mean, it scared a lot of people back then, and it's an interesting take on what would have happened in World War III. Back then, especially in the 80s, there was still a Soviet Union, and there was still a lot of tension. And having grown up in that era, we were kind of scared that the Russians would do something. You also had concerns about them in our hemisphere with stuff that broke out in Nicaragua and obviously with Cuba right there. Maybe not as intense as it was in my parents' generation in the 60s with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that, but still there was tension in the 80s, especially with the buildup of weapons. And this movie kind of plays on it. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Then I'm going to tell you a bunch of facts about the production and some of the actors and the casting. Because there's a lot of great stuff, especially on the 4K. The 4K also has a Blu-ray with it too, so you get the Blu-ray and the 4K, and the Blu-ray has the special features, which has a lot of info about how they made the film. I always suggest that you get the physical media whenever you get a chance, just because it's so hard to find it on streaming, and you never know, they could change it on streaming, or they could not ever feature it on streaming anymore. And with different companies like Best Buy no longer carrying physical media, it's important to pick it up if you want to watch the original. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about Red Dawn. Okay, so Red Dawn started as a script called 10 Soldiers, and it was written by Kevin Reynolds. It was set in the near future as combined Soviet and Cuban forces launched an invasion of the southwestern United States. 10 children take to the hills when their small town is captured, turning it into they turn into a guerrillas, essentially a skilled guerrilla band. So Reynolds wanted to try and get this movie made. He went to producer Beckerman's, and they tried to pitch the project to MGM, and MGM kept turning him down. And their senior vice president remembered it as an anti-war movie, a Lord of the Flies type movie. And the script's changes increased when Reynolds became mentored by Steven Spielberg. So Reynolds was trying to get his script done, and then he decided to do another movie called Fandango, and Spielberg was kind of mentoring him through the process of Fandango. That's when MGM kind of got a little bit more serious about him and decided to buy his script. Unfortunately, because he was shooting Fandango, he couldn't direct Red Dawn, and so they got John Milius. And Milius took a look at it. He liked the script, but he decided to make some changes. And one of the things that they were looking at was the fact that one of the Rambo movies had gone out, and they decided to make a teen Rambo movie, and they turned it over to John Milius. That's why. And so MGM had a General Alexander Haig, who's a former Nixon chief of staff, who yearned to supervise the film personally. He was heavy on their board, and so he kind of pushed it through and got Milius. And basically, what happened was Milius was signed to direct for a fee of $1.25 million plus a gun of his choice, which is kind of interesting. And Milius himself said that basically making this movie would basically make him an outcast. He looked at it as an extreme right winger in Hollywood, because nobody in Hollywood really wanted to make a movie like this, because it was very, I mean, it was just very pro gun, very pro political. It was, in some ways, it's, when you watch the movie, it's not so political, but like at the time, you know, the political stances versus the military and versus not supporting the military were a little bit stronger. And this movie is very pro-military and pro, you know, basically standing up for your rights and everything else, which probably is something everybody can agree on now. But wow, it just there was a lot of division back then, and there still is some division in Hollywood. I don't really want to get into politics, because your politics are yours, whatever you choose to believe. But let's continue to talk about this movie. So Milius was given the script, and Milius went about rewriting the script. He and Haig devised a backstory, and basically what they looked at is Haig had connections to different materials from World War II and from back then. So they found Hitler's original plans for invading the United States would be to come up through Mexico and also attack from the north as well. And so they kind of revised the script and developed the idea of how this would happen into Red Dawn. And it's kind of scary when you start to think about it. Basically, how they laid out the story was that different things happen politically in Europe where they don't really want to get into another war except for England. The Russians kind of work with the Cubans and the Nicaraguans, and then there's a civil unrest in Mexico, so that Mexico gets overthrown, and then they invade on two fronts, and that's kind of the plot line of this. They say that NATO's collapsed at the beginning of the movie, and that the U.S. is basically on its own with the sword of just part of China and England supporting the United States. So kind of interesting, kind of scary here, but that's how they set up the tactic. And they talked about the nuclear strikes. They don't show them, thank goodness, but they talk about different nuclear strikes within the movie. And you do hear some about that when Powers Booth's character comes into play. So very interesting, very scary, very, you know, kind of third world, World War III stuff. But I think part of the reason for this movie was to really open our eyes, because a lot of times, especially back then, we started to feel the sense of safety that, hey, you know, it's just basically going to be nukes and nobody's ever going to invade the mainland. And this movie showed how it could potentially get done, and that's what was so scary about it. That's why it freaked a lot of people out. So other changes that he shifted was the conflict from within the group to the conflict between the teens and their oppressors. Basically, what they did was they changed the story to where it was all high school kids and up, just to make them a little bit older so that they could do a little bit more with them. So changing the key characters from early teens to high school age and beyond. There's also the addition of a sequence where some children visit a camp to find their parents have been brainwashed, which that is scary as well. So Milius later said, and here's what he said about Hollywood. This is an exact quote: "I see this as an anti-war movie in the sense that if both sides could see this, maybe it won't have to happen. I think it would be good for Americans to see what war would be like. The film isn't even that violent. The war shows none of the horrors that could happen in World War III. In fact, everything that happened in the movie happened in World War II in some places." So it's very interesting, his quote, and very interesting the background of this movie. We're going to get into the production and the filming of this movie, because there's a lot that happened with that, and we'll get into some of the actors and what they had to say about it, what they had to say about shooting it next. So filming for this movie is very interesting. Just an intense shoot, from what I understand and from what I've heard. The movie was filmed near Las Vegas, New Mexico, and many of the buildings from the town appear in the movie. They actually used an abandoned Safeway grocery store as the soundstage, and they used that for pickups and different things that they had to do inside, which is really cool. The hotels adjacent to the train depot, the train yard, and the buildings near downtown were repainted with the different name, which was a Colorado town, which was the movie was supposed to take place in Colorado, but it was filmed in New Mexico. The cast underwent a very intensive eight-week military training course. So basically, the actors talk about this a lot in the special features on the movie. They told us about how they basically learned how to do military tactics. The actors said that they would have to go out, and they had 2 Army Rangers that had to try and find them, and they had to figure out how to hide and stay alive and all of that, and that was really cool. They also got to learn how to use not only U.S. military weapons but Russian military weapons, and how to build them, how to fire them, and then they would actually go to firing ranges and learn how to actually shoot them, so that the action in the movie was more realistic. They learned how to shoot and do everything. Like you see all the different machine guns that you see in the movie were at this range that they got to fire. The rocket launchers apparently were, they got to use real rocket launchers and learn how to do that. And it was just an intense training. The guy that taught them how to do everything and put them through a boot camp is one of the big Hollywood instructors. And he was the same guy who instructed all the guys on Band of Brothers. So he's very well versed in military training and how to do all that. So it was really cool. The other cool thing was they had to build the tanks and the helicopters kind of from scratch. And the tanks, they got so precise to Russian tanks that the CIA came and flew overhead and had to question them, "What are you doing?" And they were saying they were shooting a movie. And they had like 3 or 4 tanks that they used, and they would repaint and make them changes, but they looked exactly like Russian tanks. They were built on like chassis of U.S. tanks, which apparently Russian tanks use the same kind of chassis. But they looked so precise that after the movie was done, they lent they gave the tanks to the CIA, and the CIA used them for different covert activities to help them understand what Russian tanks and what Russian vehicles looked like. They also got permission from the FAA, which was really cool, to build these helicopters. They were like French helicopters, but they changed them to resemble Russian helicopters. Now, one of the things that they said in the cutscenes or in the special features is that they got permission to fly them, but they couldn't fly them over any kind of towns or kind of known areas because they didn't know exactly how safe they necessarily were. There could be props that were falling off of them. So that's part of the reason why you see the attack run over kind of a canyon area, so that it was safe for them to fly and do that. And those helicopters are amazing. They're really cool. Apparently they looked like Soviet helicopters at the time that the Soviets really had. Their helicopters were a little bit different from the U.S. helicopters at the time. The U.S. eventually got similar helicopters to what you see in the movie, but at the time that they shot it in like 1984, we didn't have a helicopter like that. So really kind of interesting. So there were different weapons that they devised for the film that didn't work. They were going to use futuristic stuff, but some of it didn't work. So they tried to get more realistic stuff that was closer to the time, because they couldn't get real long futuristic stuff. They were trying to set it a few years down the road, but ended up doing that differently. So the budget increased from $11 million to $15 million to eventually $19 million because of all the different things that they were doing for it, which was pretty cool. They also shot it sequentially. So basically, the whole movie that you see is shot all together. Usually, most movies will split up and they'll shoot this scene here, this scene here. They won't shoot it sequentially. But Milius did that because what he wanted to do was see the wear and tear on the actors, so that you could see how war really affected these kids, and you kind of see it in the ending scenes, and as we get close to the end of the movie, which is kind of interesting, kind of cool. The other thing that's interesting about this movie is that it's the first movie to get the new PG-13 rating. So it was the first movie that they changed that for, and part of the reason is because of all the different things that I'm about to tell you. At the time it was released, Red Dawn was considered the most violent film by the Guinness Book of World Records and the National Coalition of Television Violence, with a rate of 134 acts of violence per hour, or 2.23 per minute. The 2007 DVD special edition includes an on-screen carnage counter and a nod to this, which that's kind of cool. That's interesting. Kind of gruesome, but you see the point. That's the other reason why it freaks so many people out to see it. So, a couple of other facts that are interesting. 5 of the 36 paratroopers in the beginning of the film. So there's a beginning where you have the paratroopers that attack the school. So 5 of those got blown as much as a mile off course during filming, and one of them got stuck in a tree. And because they were dressed in military gear, Russian military gear, they had to convince the locals that he wasn't really a Russian and it really wasn't an invasion, if you can believe that. Kind of really scary, but kind of funny if you think about it. There are a couple other things that I'm about to tell you about the actors, but the film contains no computer graphic effects or composites or miniatures. All the explosions are real and all are actual size. So there is a scene that John Milius talks about, and they talk about, which is you see the battlefield and you see kind of what's supposed to be napalm that's being used in the mountains. And what had happened is Milius learned how to do that on Apocalypse Now, where they rig up a canister so they can get kind of the effect to where it's kind of rolling like a napalm would do. And they had set it up, and it accidentally went off before they could shoot it. And they thought, oh, great, we just wasted resources. Milius is going to be frustrated. Milius looked at that, and he said, we actually need to use more. It needs to be bigger. So it was a good thing that it didn't do that. But when they finally got it and got the explosion, the way it looks on screen is just awesome. It's the way that real life napalm would work, and it's wow. It's just fantastic the way that they shot that and they did that. The epilogue showing the Partisan Rock, which is a cool rock where they would write their names, with a voiceover explaining the Americans eventually won the war, was added at the studio's insistence. John Milius, for his part, he viewed the ending. He just wanted to end it with Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen's character at the end. He felt like he didn't need to add that, but the studio insisted. So I thought that was interesting, and it's kind of surreal. Jed, in the end, towards the end, Patrick Swayze's character Jed writes his name and Matt's name on the rock before they even go back into town to make the distraction, because he knows that they'll probably die. When Erica finds the airman, Powers Booth's character, she tries to ascertain his nationality by asking him to identify the capital of Texas, which, me being from Texas, that's an easy one. Well, Powers Booth is from Texas as well, and there's a slight tip of the cap because Patrick Swayze is from Houston. So when he answers Austin, Erica incorrectly says, wrong, it's Houston. The correct answer was a play on Powers Booth and Patrick Swayze both being from Texas and Patrick Swayze being from Houston. So another interesting thing that I thought was fascinating, and especially for those of us that are Star Trek fans as well, Roy Jensen plays the father of Robert Morris, who's C. Thomas Howell's character, and you see him at the beginning because he's the one that owns the gas station, to where they get all their supplies and they put them in the truck and they're heading towards the mountains. Well, he plays his father, and he's one of the main characters in the band of American teenagers who escape to the mountains. That's Robert. Basically, it's the same actor that was in the original Star Trek television episode series, The Omega Glory, where Jensen played Cloud William, the chief of the tribe of the Yanks, on a parallel planet who have survived and evolved and waged a guerrilla war against the Khans, who are the communists, by taking to the mountains and plains and adapting the tribal lifestyle of the American Indian. And if you remember that Star Trek episode, the Yangs and the Kongs, they have the Plabnista, the thing, and Kirk realizes that what it is the Constitution, and reads it out, and it's a very famous scene. Go look that up if you've never seen it. It's a great episode, but an interesting Star Trek nod. But anyway, that's some things about the production. Let's get into these actors and some of the stories about these actors and some of the stories that happened to them. Some edits in the story that we didn't know about that could have made the film a little bit more interesting. So we're going to get into that next. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actors and some of the things that they knew about in the movie, and some of the things that were cut out from their point of view that would have added their characters. So Powers Booth, who plays the Colonel, claimed that Milius cut out the emotional life of his character. Originally, his character was anti-war as well as a rightist. He was supposed to be the voice of reason in the movie, but certain cuts negated that aspect of his character. Leah Thompson said the original cut featured a love scene between her and Powers Booth. You can kind of see that she's interested in him when she gives him the flower, and he's told, "Oh, you made a new friend." Well, she's interested in him, and part of her character is that she was kind of the quiet one, because apparently her background is that the Russians tried to attack her and tried to rape her, and she ends up falling for Powers Booth's character. And apparently there was supposed to be a love scene between them, and this was cut out because the audience, the test audience, thought that there was too much of an age gap between this young girl and this older gentleman, and she was kind of upset about that. She thought it would be a terrific scene. So that's interesting, because that would have really added a different dimension to it. The other thing that happened in the movie is that you had a lot of young actors. And so Patrick Swayze was the older actor. This was actually Charlie Sheen's first movie. And so Charlie Sheen was kind of guiding them through. So you had Leah Thompson, Jennifer Grey, Charlie Sheen, C. Thomas Howell, and a couple of other actors that didn't have the experience that Swayze did. So Swayze was really their go-to guy. But also C. Thomas Howell had some experience. So C. Thomas Howell was a real cowboy. He had been a rodeo cowboy, and he helped teach them how to ride horses. And Leah Thompson said that he helped her pick out a pair of boots that she had up until, like, I guess, the 2007 cut. She said, "Oh, I'm wearing the same boots that he helped me pick out back then." So kind of cool to see Thomas Howell. One of the things that they had to do with their training and with the film shooting is that they were out in some freezing temperatures. So they shot the movie in like November, December, and January in the mountains in New Mexico. And some of the nights it would get 40 below. The last scene of the movie with Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen's character, that was so cold that's almost dangerous conditions to be outside filming or outside doing anything in that. So that's how cold and how bad it was. Patrick Swayze also said he got frostbite during filming. And what he said in an interview is that if it gets cold, if it got cold on his hands and toes, he could still feel it. And it felt like, somebody putting pins into his hands and fingers. Kind of a gruesome thought, but yeah, that's just, oh my goodness, that's kind of crazy. So, other things about Patrick Swayze is that Milius basically asked him to be his kind of lieutenant, and he basically taught these kids, and he basically took his role seriously, and he basically grilled them. And Swayze said that a lot of the actors didn't necessarily like him because of the way he was acting on and off camera, because he was trying to teach them and help them out. And he particularly got into it a little bit with Jennifer Grey. And one of the other things that was interesting about that is that he and Jennifer Grey were supposed to have a love scene in Red Dawn, which kind of makes sense with Tony's death, with the grenade and everything, and how Jed's there and how he cares for her. They were supposed to have some kind of love scene, and Patrick Swayze pushed to push it out of it because he was like, "Well, hey, this is such an intense action movie. You got all this going on. Why would I go off and make love under a tree when all this other stuff's going around me? I don't think that really fits the story." And that would have added to Jennifer Grey's character, and so she was mad at him for taking away from her character. And she was so mad at him. And by the end of the movie, they didn't know if they would work together again. Well, it turns out 3 years later they did work together again. Dirty Dancing. Check out that movie. It's a good movie. I don't know if I'll review it, but if you want me to review it, let me know if you want me to review Dirty Dancing. We'll review it at some point. But yeah, Swayze was just like the lieutenant, and he just took charge of them. Basically, the other cool thing was how they auditioned. So, particularly the girls, Milius had something in mind that he would ask the girls. He would say, "What would happen if you were in the wilderness and you were starving? Could you kill a bunny?" And he'd say a bunny, not a rabbit. And basically, in the audition process, any girl that says that she couldn't kill the rabbit and eat it, basically wouldn't get the part. And so Jennifer Grey and Leah Thompson obviously gave the correct answer because they got the part. So kind of cool, kind of fun. Another thing that I learned from watching some of the videos and some of these actors, Charlie Sheen and C. Thomas Howell would tell of how cold it got. And Leah Thompson even alluded to this. It got to the point where basically what they had to learn was you took a plastic bag and put it over your foot, then you put on your wool sock, then you put on your silk sock, and that helped keep you a little bit warmer. But the other thing that they had to do is they were firing these guns, and it was so hard to be able to, use the trigger finger and be able to shoot them through the gloves. So what they had to do is they take off part of the glove and expose part of their hand, and it did make them susceptible to frostbite. And the military strategist that was helping them out shooting the film would teach them, hey, this is how you overcome this. This is how you overcome the cold. Because at that point, it wasn't the action. It was the mental aspect of overcoming the cold and overcoming the fear and the thought of frostbite up there. So that was interesting. Another thing is some of the villains of this. So William Smith played the Russian colonel. I'm going to butcher this name. Strelenkov, I think is how you pronounce it. So in real life, Bill Smith was in the CIA and he spoke Russian, and he was an interrogator for the CIA, and a Russian one. So he really got into the role. And Charlie Sheen said he was terrifying, like on and off the set. He was very terrifying out of him, made for a good villain. But Charlie Sheen said, I don't know if he was in character the whole time, but you couldn't talk to him on the set. You just kept your distance. But it worked in the movie. Look at how brilliant he is in the film. He's an imposing force. And I agree with that. Wow, he is a real imposing force. Another thing that was really cool is Leah Thompson said that they would have midnight raids to practice. And so what they would do is in the middle of the night, they'd knock on each other's doors and yell Wolverines. And then they'd go out and play hide and go seek with their fake weapons throughout the town. And so they kind of practice their maneuvers. They practice their guerrilla warfares on their own. It would happen in the middle of the night like a fire drill. And they'd grab their coats and run out in the middle of town in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And she said it was like camp. It was so much fun. And all the actors that I've seen video for said that they really enjoyed their experience on the film, that it was just a great bonding experience. And C. Thomas Howell even mentioned that he used a lot of techniques that he learned in Red Dawn in his other movies. So it was really, really great experience for these actors. one of the other things about Charlie Sheen was that this was his first movie, and he apparently was real gun ho, real excited to do it, especially since he got to visit his dad on the set for Apocalypse Now. Yeah, so the set of Apocalypse Now is where he kind of grew up and got to learn it. So he wanted to do a war movie, and this is his first film. So kind of an intense movie to have for your first film. But Charlie Sheen went on to have an amazing career. So did several of these other actors. But let's wrap it up with some of my favorite scenes from the movie, and we'll talk more about Red Dawn. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and also share your comments. What did you like about this movie? Is it one of your favorites? Do you remember watching it as a kid? Did it scare you? Did you play guns as a kid? Did this kind of inspire you? Let me know in the comments, and I'll tell you more about my favorite scenes coming up. Okay, how do you nail down just one or two scenes in this movie? I love a lot of scenes in this movie. I'm just going to go over a few of them that are my favorite. The first one that I really want to talk about is basically their escape from the high school and going to the mountains, where Jed gets them all in the truck. They go and get supplies from Robert's dad's gas station, and then they're trying to get away, and the U.S. helicopter kind of blows up the Russian tanks that are blocking off their way to the mountains, and they make their way in the mountains, and you have the kids trying to figure out what they're going to do, and one of them kind of stands up as class president. We should go do this, and Swayze basically tells them, hey, you either stay up here with me or you get going. And basically he lays down the law and takes charge. And it's such a great scene for Swayze and his character. And it really sets the tone from there that he's the leader. He's got to take responsibility for these kids, and they need to look to him. The next scene that I like is where Robert shoots the deer, because it shows the change in his character. He's an innocent kid that didn't really know anything. He'd never hunted before, didn't know anything about killing, was kind of thrust into this situation where their town has been invaded by the Russians, and he's thrust into this war. And he loses his folks, and he builds this mentality where he doesn't care anymore. And his character just, he's stripped of all of his emotions because it's all about the fight now. It's all about what he does. And there's another scene later on where Powers Booth says, all that hate's gonna eat you up inside, and he's like, keeps me warm, which just shows kind of the depth of his character and the interesting part of his character. And so I kind of like that about him. Love the scene where Powers Booth character gets discovered by Leah Thompson's character, and the thing that I alluded to about the capital of Texas. And I think it's really interesting when he comes into play here, because at that point in the film, the characters have done a few things. They've gone on a few raids, but they've never done anything super big, and they've never really done actual military procedures. They've just done what they thought they could do. And Powers Booth character leads them on a major raid where they take out an airfield and they free a bunch of people, and it's just a really cool scene, how they do that and what they do with that. So the other scene is the scene with the tanks, which are kind of cool. You got two big tanks, and it's the death scene for Powers Booth character, and just how he goes about throwing the smoke grenade at the tank so that the U.S. military can blow those up. And it's a really intense, interesting scene, and it means a lot to them, which is really cool. Other scenes are where they kind of free people, and where they are able to give them guns, and they said, hey, if we're going to die, let's die standing up, which is kind of the whole point of the freedom of this movie, and kind of the spirit of the movie. So I thought those scenes were cool. The next scene I alluded to, the helicopters. So there are these 3 helicopters that are so awesome, and apparently they look like real Russian helicopters at the time, which were kind of scary with the way that they act. And when they come and they attack the kids, it's on. It's serious. And C. Thomas Howell's character tries to take it out with a rocket launcher, and he's able to shoot like through it, and maybe kill one guy, but he eventually is to the point where he can't do anything more but just take his machine gun and just shoot at it as best he can when the helicopter's coming in on a strafe. And it's just, whoa, you're like, oh my goodness. And then Jennifer Grey's character also gets hit, and that's the emotional scene where Patrick Swayze character Jed gives her the grenade. She asks him to shoot her, and he can't do it, and so he gives her the grenade, and so she's holding on to a pulled pin grenade so that when they discover her body, they blow up, and that's what happens. So very interesting, very intense, very cool one, and that leads to towards the end of the movie, which is probably my favorite scene where Charlie Sheen and Patrick Swayze's character Jed Matt basically know that they're going to die, and what they're trying to do is create a distraction so that the other two survivors can get out and get back to the safe side and the American side. And essentially what they tell them is like, somebody's got to live. Somebody's got to be able to tell everybody what happened here. And so they go on this raid of the train yard, and they're blowing all kinds of stuff up with the rocket launchers, hitting everything. And the main bad guy, who I alluded to, Sri Lanka, I can't pronounce his name. Anyway, he basically sees him on the train, and he shoots him, and then he's trying to go in for the kill, and Patrick Swayze's character comes up behind him, you lose, and shoots him at the end, and that's kind of cool. And then you see Patrick Swayze carrying Charlie Sheen's character, and they get stopped by the main guy from Nicaragua, who had seen this guerrilla warfare, who basically, his story is interesting, and I don't think we delve enough into it in the movie, because he understands what guerrilla warfare was like because he came up with it. And he's basically to the point where he doesn't want anything to do with this anymore. He's about to announce his resignation when the city and the base gets attacked. And so he sees them and he lets them go, which is an interesting, tender moment. It shows a difference and a change in his character. And then you see Patrick Swayze's tender moment with Charlie Sheen's character, where they're by the playground where they used to play as kids. It's a very tender, bittersweet moment. And then finally, the ending. I do like the ending scene. I disagree with Milius. I like the epilogue with The Rock and letting us know the U.S. eventually did win the war. And basically, guerrillas, who are mostly children, stood their ground here so that this nation would stand. It would never be wiped off the face of this earth, which I thought was really cool. Anyway, that's Red Dawn. Those are my favorite scenes. Just a little bit about it. Tell me what you liked about it, as I said. Tell me what you like in the comments. Tell me your favorite scenes. Tell me what this movie means to you, and any other comments you want to have. What's the next movie you want me to review on this fun channel that I've got? Remember, it's all for fun. Please hit the like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.